Maidenberg, if you can, just talk to us a little bit about, this rise in violence we're seeing among teenagers in our schools, and, some of the concerns that you might have with that on a professional level.
Sure. So I think we need to understand a little bit about what's contributing to this violence in order to, find ways to rectify it. So for one, what we know is during the pandemic, stress obviously increased, isolation increased, and access to any kind of care decreased. So the only people who actually thrived during this time, I would have to say, or enjoyed it, was those who were socially anxious. My socially anxious, patients really appreciated the pandemic. Everyone else, not so much. In the homes, that we know there's an increase in domestic violence, an increase in abuse, an increase in substance use and abuse. So, for people who actually really needed to leave their home, I'm going to say, and had salvage to go to school or work, when you were stuck at home, it was, exacerbated tenfold. And any kind of stressor
catastrophic for them.
Yeah. So if you think about the cumulative stress, for that period of time, and if you think about we were home for a pretty significant period of time. So we can't just say, oh, now we're okay, we're, out. No, there's this residual stress and trauma that we're all experiencing. There was also financial stress too, which again exacerbates things in terms of people's ability to regulate their emotions, etc. We can't forget about the racial and civil unrest. So I think that's a really important piece of this, which we have to consider. And the reason why I say that is there's really a lack of confidence that kids and adults have in both our government and our political system, and also, in terms of police. The people who are supposed to protect us, now we're being leery about, again, how safe we are with them. So it becomes this whole convoluted way of looking at our safety, and again, it induces a lot of fear and anger. The other thing too is we could never forget is our access to guns. And I think another really, really important, particularly with kids, which we also lose sight of, everybody's stressed. So it's not just kids, it's also parents. So if you think about the way that parents are communicating in general, there's a lot of, for example, controversy over mask policies, vaccination policies, and I could go on and on. So you're going home and you hear the parents go off. And this was the case, by the way, with this recent shooting. So I just want to say that if you look at a lot of the text messages of the mom and dad, you feel the aggression and which way they leaned, so to speak, right? Yeah. So kids
and the
coming
son
home,
is mirroring that.
the kids coming home, hearing about, right? Again, we're talking about also aggression towards authority. We're talking about their opinions, right? Right. And then their access and actually physically buying a gun and having access to it for a kid who is obviously very at risk and vulnerable for it. So, it's like a disaster waiting to happen if you think about it. The other thing, which I think social media, kids, when they're isolated, have more access to social media. And again, TikTok challenges, I could go on and on and on and on. We know how that influences. And the other piece, which is two pieces, which I think are so pivotal. One is 800,000 people died. Okay. So we're sitting not only with stress and agitation, we're sitting with complicated grief.
And also fears perhaps for your own mortality among a young group of kids that normally think that they're invincible and don't really have to worry about whether they're going to get sick tomorrow and die.
Exactly. It's actually, if you think about developmentally, it's not a very normal, typical thing for a kid to be thinking about, right? And the other piece of it, which I think is so critical, and I haven't heard anybody talk about this, which actually incites me, but, treatment, access to treatment. I could tell you that therapists are so overwhelmed right now. Most people have closed their practices. There's not even a spot to be had. I know for myself, I do a lot of short-term trauma treatment and other types of treatment. So I do have a lot of people on maintenance who come in, periodically. So I'm able to kind of squeeze people in here and there. so unfortunate, but other people have closed their practices. They do not have spots, particularly psychiatrists, et cetera.
There's such a
So
demand.
there's such a demand, and there's like a decrease in access. And here's this. So people might say, well, there's school counselors, social workers, psychologists in some schools. In other schools, even in those schools, the access, the amount of kids that need it, there's not enough care. And not only is there not enough care, kids don't readily go to school psychologists or social workers. Why? Because of confidentiality, right? Like, I'm going to sit and talk to my counselor, and I know that they're talking to this one and that one, and who knows what's going to leak out. I just had an incident with a kid just the other day where, and I had a conversation with the counselor because we were following up about this kid. And I said to her, not for nothing, but like, he actually says to me, why should I be talking to her? Because she's talking to this one that doesn't like me, and this one who thinks, who judges me in this way, etc. Or this one who's bullying me.
So the person's not safe. The person who's supposed to be safe isn't safe.
But
Right.
Talking to the person who's aggressive or bullying me. Why would a kid want to be talking to a counselor who is, who's again,
Who might not believe them. Right.
Well, and it was interesting because in that dynamic, he said to me, yeah, like they're telling their side of the story. I'm telling my side of the story. And then people outside of our dynamic are telling their side of the story. Like, how could I trust that she's going to get what I'm saying, that she's going to believe me, and that she's going to actually be able or want it to help me?
So it's not a reliable source of help that people should say, just go to the school counselor and you'll be fine. Right.
Well, and then even on top of that, so I'm going to add another piece of it. The school counselors are overwhelmed. Like, it's literally, if you think about it, it's like a chicken coop. It's like one after another. They're seeing kids like on this turnover, and we can't even lose sight of their own trauma, right? Like, we're parents, again, we're parenting kids just like everybody else, right? And not only are we parenting, kids, but, we may have complicated grief. We may be concerned about our own safety and well-being. And like here's an example. We have this new variant. Well, I could just tell you, yesterday, my daughter, 6 kids in her class were infected. 6 kids. So guess what? Today and yesterday, she was remote. And we don't know. They even kind of sent an email. They're like, we don't know what's going to happen before vacation. Well, we have to kind of see. I teach at NYU. I just got an email from them too. They sent all their students home, and they're taking their finals at home because they don't want to run the risk that kids are not going to be able to go home for the holidays.
Sure. So there's too many variables, too much unrest. There's so much, pent up emotions that children don't have the opportunity to verbalize and share. Where do you see this going then? So in terms of help, I know you're on a time pinch.
That's okay. And, just one more thing, because I have to say this too. Suicide among youth and again, I don't even see, a lot of the things that I'm saying, I haven't seen in the media, which just like, it infuriates me. I could tell you, okay, because I see a lot of college students, I see a lot of high school students and adults, and I can't even tell you every college that I've spoken to kids in these colleges, there's been suicides.
Wow.
Yes, and I'm not exaggerating.
I believe it. I had my cousin, her stepdaughter, the boyfriend committed suicide in college. And I thought the same thing you did. Where are the resources to help these poor kids? His mother had committed suicide the year earlier. And then he just found out his father had terminal cancer and literally went from being okay to in hospice within like 24 hours. And he died by suicide at school. And, there was no support system to say, wow, this child could be struggling, or there's some major flags here and stuff. I mean, it's horrible.
It's a travesty. And not only that, so there are kids that are committing suicide. There are kids that are witnessing others commit suicide. It's a disaster. And this is not only happening in colleges, it's happening in high schools too. I have heard personally of at least 3 stories in the last week where kids have committed suicide that were in high school. So we are just missing the boat here, I have to tell you. And it's going to wreak havoc. I mean, we're talking about long-term residual trauma that needs to be addressed, because if you think we have violence now, just wait in the years coming. It's going to be really scary.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And the violence is just the tip of the iceberg. Like you
Yeah.
said, we're not talking about the suicides.
So, you're asking, what do we do about all this, right?
Yes.
Because the magic question. So I did write an article. I'm a blogger for Psychology Today, and I wrote recently an article about it. And it's so interesting because you would think some of my other articles get like 20,000 views, etc. Right? Those are like more self-help and, mindfulness based. This was on this, it was called, Have We Become Numb to School Shootings? That's what it was called. Not nearly as many views.
Really?
So that's telling in and of itself, that like, what's going on? Why are people not even paying attention? Like, and I think a lot of that has to do, we're so overwhelmed that we're literally desensitized that we cut off our
Right.
emotions because it's so painful that we don't even want to read an article about that.
Right.
Because number one, nothing's
It's too
happening.
painful to acknowledge.
It's too
Right.
painful to acknowledge. Number one, I don't want to think or relate to my kid being at risk. Okay. Because it's scary, right? And number three, nothing's going to happen anyway. So why should I be in a state of helplessness and have to read that and then think about what's not being done? So that in and of itself, but things that I suggested, which, right, I really think of it as a systemic, multifaceted approach, and we really have to look at it in that way. There's the debate with gun control, which I'm not going to, even touch on because we could go back and forth. The day that we said it was okay for our kids to be at risk and not to do something about it was the day that we gave permission for this to happen. And it's really not okay. Integrating social emotional learning and mindfulness and curriculums in school. We do not learn how to regulate our emotion. We don't learn about frustration tolerance. We don't learn about relationships. We don't learn about any of those things. We don't learn about any of those things, and we have to get on board. This is just not okay. Low cost or free access to healthcare, to mental health care. All of those things are so, especially now, like I said, with complicated grief and the rise in violence, etc. Like all of these, it's not even, it's something we need access to. And profiling at-risk kids. That is so critical. The signs are there every single time there's been a shooting. And I mean every single time. What's the media that comes out afterwards? They had a social media page. The grandmother, whoever heard some inkling of something. They have a history of violence. I mean, there's always signs. Always. So there's no excuse for it. There just isn't. So teachers, administration, everybody needs to learn how to profile. That should be required in schools. And kids shouldn't be overlooked and sent back to class.
Sure.
They should be going home for observation and not be allowed back at school until they have authority from a licensed mental health professional, allowing them to come back in school and to express.
To say they're safe.
Yes. So that is my, that is in a nutshell.
Oh my goodness, there's so much. We could go on for days. I appreciate you, and I'm sorry for the mishap with the scheduling. I'll be sure to read the recent report that you put out in full, and we'll include that in our piece. So we're going to be continuing to cover this next week. So I'm looking to incorporate your interview then.
Terrific.
So thank you. So nice to meet you.
You too. Are you able to send me the Zoom link
for
this interview?
Oh, you mean the record of it? Yeah, that's no problem. Sure.
Because I wanted to put on my social media.
Yeah, absolutely. That'd be great. Absolutely. Yes, you can tag me in there. And I don't know if you know how we got connected, but Dr. Stephanie O'Leary is the sister of my photographer, Stephen O'Leary.
Oh, how funny.
So I reached out to her as my local go-to gal, and she says she's up to her eyeballs and things and referred me to you. So it was good to meet you.
And if you ever need any help in any other way, let me know. Because
yes,
yeah, I write on all different topics, and I have a TED talk that just came out the other day. It's called Circumventing Emotional Avoidance. And it's all about this. It's about learning how to regulate our emotions and just being with. So you might want to see it. It's like 16 minutes, but you might find it interesting.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again. And I'll email you the Zoom on this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.